So this is a 1963 Corvette Grand Sport. This is chassis number 003. Only 5 of these cars were ever made. These cars were driven by people like Roger Penske, Jim Hall, Augie Pabst, and A.J. Foyt. This particular car is in the livery that it raced at Sebring in 1964, where it's reported that A.J. Foyt passed 50 cars in the opening lap with this car.
A.J. Foyt's trying to catch up too. After passing 50 cars on the first lap, he ran into an extended brake pad change. He's now 10th overall.
In order to understand the Grand Sport, you have to sort of understand in the environment it was created. The 50s and 60s were boom time post-World War II. The economy was going through the biggest expansion it's ever gone through in its history. And auto manufacturers were trying to sell as many cars as possible to newfound wealthy people. And one of the ways they were doing it was selling performance. In 1957, the Automobile Manufacturers Association, the AMA, was a group that put a ban on racing. They wanted to prioritize safety and comfort over performance. Also in 1957, a guy named Zora Arkus-Duntov, who was an engineer but also a racer, he won Le Mans in 54 and 55 in a Porsche, became the head of all high-performance cars at GM. And his idea was one day take the Corvette to Le Mans. So 57 to 62, Corvette was offering options packages to customers, thereby skirting the rule of manufacturers not being directly involved with racing. And in 1962, he came out with a Z06 package for a Stingray, which he thought, and the Corvette engineers thought, would be what Corvette needed to be competitive. They showed up at Riverside with this first Z06 package. It was an option that was a fuel-injected 327, 36-gallon gas tank, upgraded sway bars and springs, and high-performance drum brakes. There is such a thing. And they showed up at Riverside with the Z06, and a guy by the name of Carroll Shelby showed up at the same race with his first small block Cobra. And even though the Z06 won, the Cobra was significantly faster. It was after that race, the writing was on the wall, and Zora went to Bunky Knudsen, who was the president of GM at the time, and said, hey, I have this idea. Let's build lightweight Stingrays, because Cobra's coming, and we have to have an answer for them. Bunky gave his blessing and said, go for it. So throughout '63, they started developing what would become this car here. They looked at a '63 Stingray and looked at every possible way to lighten it. So the front, '63 Stingrays have pop-up headlights. These headlights are recessed into the body, getting rid of the motors. One of the things they realized was they needed all these cutouts on the hood and on the sides and in the back of the car. The car created so much lift, they were trying to get rid of air from underneath the car to keep the car a little more planted. The body was paper-thin fiberglass instead of the heavier duty fiberglass seen on the road cars. The wheels were magnesium and much wider than came on the stock '63 Stingray. Because they were wider, you needed fender flares. One of the FIA rule stipulations were tires can't stick out beyond the bodywork. Everything that was steel on this car that they could replace with aluminum, they did. So the rear differential housing is aluminum. 377 cubic inch, all aluminum engine. The heads are aluminum, the water pump's aluminum, the intake manifold's aluminum, the door hinges, and on and on and on, the wiper motors. Door handles, they actually sourced them from a mid-50s pickup truck. They're already aluminum, they had them, but Zora recessed them into the door here. Because it was designated to be a production-based car, it has a full interior. This particular car has been vintage raced, so it has some more modern safety equipment in it. As the cars were delivered, had a very lightweight carpet, very minimalistic interior. This car, unlike the street 63s, has brake cooling in the rear fenders. We have a differential cooler in the back that they developed. The frame was almost 100 pounds lighter than a stock 63 Stingray, and they went to a tubular frame that was big diameter but thin wall, so gave it great rigidity but lightweight. The Stingrays were famous for being a split window. They had the body continued down, and then you'd have two individual rear windows. This car has one plexiglass rear window that was ultimately lighter. And then on the top here, they used a fuel vent. The other thing that's different from a 63 road car is not much of a trunk here. There was a provision for a spare tire, which sat just above the battery there. We had the fuel pumps and not much else. And all this was, the battery is put back here for better weight distribution. In 1963, in December, there's something called the Nassau Speedweeks. And throughout, leading up to the Speedweeks, these cars were testing with a narrow body. And at one test at Sebring, the car was so competitive that word finally made its way to the chairman of GM, a guy named Frederick Donner, who was very upset that Corvette and Chevrolet was getting any attention for racing and high performance because of this ban from 1957. So he, in no uncertain terms, said, crush the cars, get rid of them, we don't want them. And the reason he was so specific about it is the Justice Department was eyeing GM because they had over a 50% market share. And if it got to 60, they were talking about breaking up General Motors. And Mr. Donner didn't want anything to do with that. So he didn't want anything to jeopardize the future of General Motors. So in 1963 for Nassau, rather than crush the car, these cars were placed with a privateer named John Meekum, and Corvette engineers happened to find themselves on vacation in the Bahamas in December of 1963, and the cars came off the boat with these wide flares, these vents, the holes in the back, the brake cooling, and they showed up. Shelby was there, Ferrari was there, and these Grand Sports were 10 seconds a lap faster than the Cobras and the Ferrari GTOs. This particular car was driven by Jim Hall. These cars finished right behind the prototypes, fastest of all of the production cars. After Nassau, Zora took cars 001, 002, brought them back to GM, and they cut the roofs off them to get them ready for Daytona. He thought it'd have an aerodynamic advantage at Daytona. But after word reached Mr. Donner that these cars were successful in Nassau, after he said, crush the cars, he was furious. And he went to Zora and said, absolutely stop this program or else. So Zora's idea of having this lightweight Stingray to go against Cobra was absolutely right. The problem was they didn't have the support to continue to develop the car. They went from a concept to a car that beat the Cobras and the GTOs in less than a year. The Grand Sport wasn't famous for a particular race win. Rather, it was a halo car for what could be if engineers were left alone in the workshop to develop the meanest and fastest Corvette on the planet. The Grand Sport program was a harbinger of what could be if Corvette went racing in earnest with factory support. It wasn't until 1999, when GM finally launched Corvette Racing, that would grow from the seeds of the Grand Sport program. Corvette Racing would go on to win every major endurance race while racking up championship after championship over the 20 years of the program. That success started with these 5 Grand Sport Corvettes in 1963.